They kicked me off the family anniversary cruise, so I purchased a massive apple orchard. When my relatives arrived with logging equipment to liquidate my timber for my brother, they assumed I was traveling. They didn't realize I had a state warden, hidden trail cams, and a federal injunction waiting. I spent 12 years building logistics software in a windowless Boston office while my family pretended I didn't exist. My older brother, Devin, was the son they all orbited. When he graduated from his Ivy League program, my parents bought him a pristine BMW. When I graduated from a state school 2 years later, I got a firm handshake from my dad and a generic Hallmark card with a $20 bill inside. When Devin wanted to start a tech company, an app that was supposed to revolutionize crypto-backed real estate, my parents mortgaged their retirement to give him a six-figure seed fund. I was working brutal 60-hour weeks, eating stale sandwiches over a keyboard, funneling every spare cent into a high-yield savings account. My dad called me the resilient one. It was his favorite excuse for never offering help. I realized early on that resilience just meant I was expected to survive on my own so they could spend their resources on Devin. In August, I found the property. It was a 60-acre heirloom apple orchard in Vermont, complete with a renovated farmhouse that smelled of old wood and wood smoke. It sat at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by mature timber, oak, maple, and white pine. The owner was 70 and moving to Florida. He priced it at $415,000 for a quick sale. I didn't finance it. I drained 12 years of savings, liquidated my market portfolios, and bought it in cash. The wire transfer left my account with less than $1,000 to my name, but the deed was mine. Clean, clear, and quiet. I didn't breathe a word to my parents. October rolled around. I was sitting on my porch, drinking coffee and looking out at rows of Roxbury russets and northern spies. When I opened Facebook, my Aunt Cora had posted a massive album of photos. The caption read, "Setting sail with the whole family." There were pictures of my parents, Devin's new girlfriend Sylvie, her 3 teenagers, my cousins, my aunts. They were standing on the deck of a luxury Caribbean cruise liner. It was my parents' 30th anniversary. No one had told me. I set my mug down. I called my mom. She answered on the second ring, the sound of a steel drum band echoing in the background. She stammered the moment she heard my voice. "Oh, honey," she said, her tone dropping into that placating register she always used when she was caught. "Devin's new girlfriend has 3 teenagers, and we had to give them your cabin to keep the peace. You know how stressful things have been for your brother. You're single. You're so independent. You'll survive." I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just hung up the phone. That was the 4th major family event I'd been quietly erased from to make room for Devin's chaotic life. I put the phone on silent, grabbed a basket, and spent the rest of the week picking Honeycrisps on my own land. I felt completely, untouchably at peace. That peace lasted until December. My dad plays golf every Sunday, and his usual partner is a guy named Sullivan, an underwriter at a local credit union. Sullivan processed my commercial agricultural insurance policy. He saw my name, saw the acreage, and during their back nine, he clapped my dad on the shoulder and congratulated him on his son's massive real estate acquisition. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, my phone was a wall of notifications. The first call was from my mom. I answered it against my better judgment. She didn't say hello. She was practically hyperventilating. "You bought a commercial orchard? You bought a 60-acre estate and you hid it from us?" I told her it was my money, my land, and my business. Her voice went shrill. "Your brother is drowning. Do you understand me? His startup failed. The SEC is looking into his crypto ledgers. He has $150,000 ears lien on him, and you are sitting on a fortune. You need to sign over the back 20 acres. Devin talked to a timber company. If we clear-cut the South Ridge, the lumber will cover the tax debt. You owe this to your family." I pressed end. I went to her contact in my phone, scrolled to the bottom, and hit block. For the next 4 weeks, my inbox became a dumping ground for their panic. Devin sent emails detailing his legal jeopardy, demanding I liquidate the trees. Sylvie sent me a message accusing me of trying to make her children homeless by letting Devin go to jail. My dad left voicemails that alternated between commanding me to sign over the deed and begging me to just let a logging crew thin the ridge. I didn't reply to a single one. Instead, I drove down to the county clerk's office and filed a preemptive trespassing notice against my father and my brother. Then, I hired an environmental and property lawyer named Reese Drent. We drafted a federal injunction based on a protected wetland designation that covered my lower 20 acres. Finally, I bought a dozen Browning trail cameras and strapped them to the oaks along my property line, syncing them to a cellular base station in my house. I knew they wouldn't let it go. Devin's heir's deadline was approaching, and desperation makes people do incredibly stupid things. In late April, I called my Aunt Cora. I kept the conversation light. I told her I was exhausted from work and was flying to a tech conference in Chicago for the first week of May. I mentioned my flight times. I knew she would tell my mother. On the morning of May 4th at 6:15 a.m., my phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was an alert from Camera 4, located on the Southridge Access Road. I sat up. The screen showed a live feed of the dirt path that cuts into my back 20 acres. My dad's silver F-150 was parked squarely across the property line. Devin was standing next to it, holding a plastic clipboard, waving frantically at a massive flatbed truck that was slowly backing up the grade. Strapped to the flatbed was a yellow feller buncher, a heavy piece of commercial logging equipment designed to cut and stack timber on an industrial scale. I put on my boots, a heavy jacket, and walked out the back door. The air was freezing, the ground slick with morning dew. I didn't run. I walked at a steady, deliberate pace up the incline. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I had saved on speed dial. State Forestry Warden Graves answered on the first ring. He was parked in his state vehicle just over the blind hill on the county road, exactly where we had agreed he would wait. "They're here," I said. "On my way," Graves replied. I crested the ridge. The smell of diesel exhaust was already thick in the damp air. The flatbed's hydraulic ramps were lowering with a mechanical whine. A logging crew of 4 guys in muddy Carhartts were unchaining the feller buncher. I walked directly out of the tree line and onto the dirt road. My dad was holding a thermos of coffee. He turned, saw me, and his face went entirely slack. The thermos slipped from his fingers, hitting the dirt and spilling black coffee over his boots. "What are you doing here?" he choked out, his voice cracking. "Defending my private property," I said. Devin dropped his clipboard. He looked at me, then looked at the logging crew, panic flaring in his eyes. He scrambled forward, putting his hands up like he was trying to calm down a stray dog. Look, just listen to me," Devin stammered. "We're just thinning the back lot. You won't even notice it's gone from the house. The timber company is paying 80 grand today. The check clears at noon. I need this cash. The IRS is freezing my accounts on Monday." "You're stealing," I said, not raising my voice. The logging foreman, a broad-shouldered guy named Holt, stepped down from the flatbed. He looked at Devin, then at me. He dropped the heavy steel chains he was holding. They clanged loudly against the deck of the truck. "Wait a second," Holt said, his voice dropping into a dangerous growl. He pointed a thick, calloused finger at Devin. "You told me this was your family's land. You showed me municipal permits." "He lied," I told Holt, keeping my eyes locked on my brother. "I am the sole legal owner of this parcel. You are trespassing, and if you drop that machine off your truck, I will have your equipment seized." My dad's face turned purple. He took a step toward me, his hands curling into fists. "You ungrateful little," before he could finish the sentence. The roar of a heavy engine cut through the trees. A green SUV with official state plates came tearing up the dirt path, its tires kicking up rocks and mud. It slammed into park right behind my dad's F-150. Warden Graves stepped out. He was a tall man, entirely unbothered by the screaming. He rested his hand on the radio at his belt. "Morning," Graves said loudly, his voice carrying over the idling diesel truck. "Who ordered commercial logging equipment onto protected land without a state permit?" Devin took 2 steps backward. All the blood left his face. My dad tried to step between Graves and my brother, his hands waving frantically. "Officer, there's a misunderstanding. This is a family dispute. My sons are just having a disagreement about the land management. I don't care about your family," Graves said flatly. "I care about the 60 acres of wetlands directly beneath this ridge." Right on cue, a silver sedan pulled up behind Graves's SUV. Reese Drent, my lawyer, got out. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a flannel shirt and jeans, but he was carrying a thick manila folder. He walked straight up to Holt. "I'm counsel for the property owner," Reese said, handing Holt a stack of papers. "This is a federal injunction prohibiting the removal of any timber on this acreage. Beside it is a drafted civil lawsuit for attempted timber theft naming your company as a defendant. I suggest you get your truck off this mountain." Holt didn't even look at the papers. He turned to Devin, grabbed him by the collar of his jacket, and shoved him hard against the side of the F-150. "You forged a permit?" Holt barked. "I mobilized a crew at 5 in the morning for a fraudulent contract." A white Lexus suddenly crested the hill, bottoming out hard on the rutted dirt. It was my mother. She threw the door open before the car was even in park. She must have been waiting down at the diner in town, ready to celebrate Devin's bailout. She took one look at Graves, the lawyer, and Holt pinning Devin against the truck, and she started sobbing hysterically. She ran toward me. "How can you do this? We are your family. He's your brother." I looked at her, then looked directly at my dad. "You gave my cruise ticket to complete strangers," I said, "but you suddenly remember I exist when you need an illegal bailout." Graves stepped forward, pulling Holt off Devin. "Back up," Graves ordered the foreman. Then he turned to my brother. "Devin, you're being detained for questioning regarding fraudulent forestry permits and attempted commercial theft. Put your hands on the hood of the truck." Devin started crying, actual physical tears. My dad was screaming at Graves, demanding to call a lawyer. My mom collapsed against the side of her Lexus, burying her face in her hands. Graves patted Devin down and put him in the back of the green SUV. He told Holt to pack up the equipment and get off the property, or he'd impound the flatbed. Reese stood next to me, silently watching the chaos unfold, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. Within 20 minutes, the ridge was clear. The flatbed backed down the mountain. My parents followed Graves' SUV toward the county station, my dad's truck leaving deep, angry ruts in the mud. I walked back down to my house. The silence of the orchard returned, settling over the trees like a heavy blanket. I sat on my porch, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and watched the sunrise burn off the morning fog. I ignored the 12 missed calls from my Aunt Cora. I felt lighter than I had in years. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was pulling weeds near the porch when my phone rang. It was Reese. "They're gone," I said, answering the phone. "Quiet up here." Reese didn't laugh. His voice was entirely flat. "We have a problem," Reese said. "I just got off the phone with Holt's corporate counsel. I reviewed the preliminary contract Devin gave the logging company to secure their services this morning. I wiped the dirt off my hands. It's fraudulent. He doesn't own the land." "I know," Reese said. "But Devin didn't just forge a forestry permit. The logging company required an $80,000 mobilization and equipment fee up front before they moved the feller buncher. Devin didn't have the cash, so he signed an indemnity and collateral agreement to secure the crew." The cold air suddenly felt much sharper. "Using what collateral?" "The deed to your property," Reese said softly. "He forged your signature as a guarantor. Holt's company filed the paperwork with the county clerk at 8 Lerdam yesterday. Because your brother defaulted on the contract by committing fraud, the logging company just activated the penalty clause. They aren't going after Devin for the money. They just filed an emergency mechanics lien on your orchard." I didn't say anything for a long time. The wind picked up, rustling the newly budded leaves on the nearest apple trees. I looked down at my hands. They were covered in dark Vermont soil. "A mechanic's lien," I finally repeated, the words tasting like ash. "For $80,000. And because it's attached to the title," Reese said, his tone clinical but tight. "If it's not satisfied within the statutory window, Holt's company can theoretically force a foreclosure sale to recoup their mobilization costs." Devin handed them the only asset he had access to. "Yours. It's forgery. It's not legally binding. It's fraud," Reese corrected, "which means it's a criminal matter now, not just a civil dispute. But until a judge officially invalidates that contract, the lien sits on your deed. Your title is clouded. You can't sell. You can't borrow against it. And you're on a ticking clock with a commercial logging company that has a very very aggressive legal department. I walked over to the porch steps and sat down heavily. The silence of the orchard didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like a trap. How does a county clerk just accept a forged signature on a commercial property lien without verifying identity? Devin used a notary, Reese said. I pulled the filing. The stamp belongs to a guy named Caspian Thorne. He runs a strip mall shipping center a couple of towns over. Either Devin paid him off, or your brother found someone who looks enough like you to pass off a fake ID. Either way, the paperwork looked official enough for the clerk to stamp it. Holt's company didn't care about the details. They just wanted their security. So what do? We go to the police, Reese said flatly. Warden Graves detained Devin for questioning regarding the environmental violations and the fake municipal forestry permit. But forgery of a property deed is a felony. I'm driving to the county station now. Meet me there. I hung up, went inside, and washed the dirt off my hands. The water ran black down the drain. I stared at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. I looked tired. I had spent 12 years working myself to the bone to escape the gravitational pull of my family's endless drama, and Devin had managed to drag me right back into the center of it with a single forged signature. I grabbed my keys and got into my truck. The drive to the county station took 20 minutes. I spent the entire time running the math in my head. $80,000. That was more money than I had left in all my accounts combined. Buying the orchard had wiped me out. If the court process dragged on, if Holt's lawyers pushed a foreclosure to force a settlement, I didn't have the liquidity to fight a protracted legal battle. Devin knew exactly what he was doing. He knew I was cash poor now. He figured if he backed me into a corner, I would just fold and let them cut the timber rather than lose the whole farm. I pulled into the gravel lot of the county sheriff's station. It was a small, red brick building with 2 squad cars parked out front. My mom's white Lexus was taking up 2 spaces near the entrance. Reese was waiting for me by the front doors. He handed me a copy of the contract Devin had signed. I looked down at the guarantor line. The signature was a decent imitation of my handwriting. Not perfect, but close enough to pass a casual glance. I already spoke to the desk sergeant, Reese said, his voice low. Graves handed Devin over to the county detectives. They have him in an interview room right now. Your parents are inside. I pushed through the heavy glass doors. The lobby was cramped, smelling of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. My dad was pacing back and forth across the scuffed linoleum, his cell phone pressed to his ear. My mom was sitting on a plastic waiting room chair, shredding a tissue into tiny pieces in her lap. When my dad saw me, he snapped his phone shut and marched across the room. He didn't look apologetic. He looked furious. Tell your lawyer to back off, my dad demanded, his voice echoing off the cinderblock walls. They're talking about charging your brother with a felony. Do you understand what that means? A felony conviction ruins his life. It ruins his startup. It ruins any chance he has of getting another investment round. I stared at him. It was almost impressive, the sheer scale of his delusion. His startup is already ruined, I said coldly. He has an ears lien. He forged my signature on a legal document and put an $80,000 debt on my house. A mechanic's lien. Did he mention that part to you? My dad waved his hand dismissively, as if I had just brought up a minor clerical error. It's collateral. It was just collateral to get the crew out there. If you had just let them thin the ridge, the timber pays for the crew, the rest pays the Ayers, and the lien vanishes. You're the one making this a disaster. You're the one who called the state warden. He tried to steal my timber to pay for his failure, I said. And when he couldn't pay the crew, he stole the equity in my land. My mom stood up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. He's desperate. He made a mistake, but you can fix it. You have to go in there right now and tell the police you authorized that signature. I looked at her, letting the words process. You want me to lie to a detective and say I agreed to guarantee an $80,000 commercial logging contract? It keeps him out of prison, she cried, her voice cracking. We can figure out the money later. Your father and I will pay you back. We'll set up a payment plan. Just go in there and tell them it was a misunderstanding. No, I said. We will pay the lien, my dad said, stepping into my personal space. He was a big man, and he used his physical presence to intimidate people. It used to work on me when I was a teenager. It didn't work anymore. I'll call Sullivan at the credit union on Monday. We'll take out a second mortgage on our house. We'll clear the 80 grand to the logging company. You won't lose a dime, but you have to drop this forgery nonsense right now. Reese stepped in smoothly. Even if my client wanted to lie to federal and state authorities, which he will not do, the logging company has already filed the lien. The fraud has been executed. The only way to remove it without paying $80,000 today is to prove it was fraudulently obtained. I told you I'd get the money, my dad shouted at Reese. Then he turned back to me, his face red. Do you have any idea what's at stake here? If Devin goes down for this, if the Ears seizes his remaining assets, they don't just take his company. He stopped, his jaw working tightly. My mom let out a quiet sob and covered her face. I looked between them. The anger in my dad's eyes was suddenly competing with raw, naked panic. What did you do? I asked quietly. My dad swallowed hard. He looked away, staring at the bulletin board on the wall. When Devin needed the bridge loan last year, to keep the servers running while he looked for new investors, the bank wouldn't give it to him without collateral. You co-signed, I said. It wasn't a question. We put the house up, my mom whispered, her voice trembling so badly I could barely hear her over the hum of the vending machine in the corner. Our house, your childhood home. We cross-collateralized it against his business loan. I felt a sudden, freezing weight settle into my stomach. If Devin declares bankruptcy, or if he goes to prison, my dad said, his voice dropping to a harsh, desperate rasp, the bank calls in the loan. We don't have the cash to cover it. They'll foreclose on us. We'll lose everything. He looked back at me, and for the first time in my 32 years of life, my father looked small. We didn't know how bad his books were, my dad said. We didn't know about the Ears lien until last month. He was trying to fix it. He found that logging company. He saw a way out for all of us. If you just sign off on that lien, if you let them cut those trees, it saves him. It saves us. They had bet their entire retirement, their home, their complete financial existence on Devin, and Devin had lost it all. So they had driven up to Vermont with logging equipment to cannibalize the the only thing I owned to cover their bad bet. Before I could answer, a heavy door down the hallway buzzed open. A detective in a wrinkled dress shirt walked out holding a manila folder. He stopped when he saw our group. He had the tired, flat eyes of someone who had spent his entire career listening to people lie. "I'm Detective Stellan," he said. He looked directly at me. "Are you the property owner?" "I am," I said. "I need you in an interview room," Stellan said, gesturing down the hall. "Your brother is currently claiming you gave him verbal authorization to act as your proxy on the logging contract, and that you're now retaliating because of a personal family dispute." Reese put a hand on my shoulder. "I'll be in the room with him," he told the detective. Stellan nodded. "Fine, let's go." My dad grabbed my arm as I started to walk past him. His grip was painfully tight. "Don't do this," he hissed. "If you tell them it's a forgery, you are putting your mother and me on the street. You are destroying this family over a bunch of dead trees." I looked down at his hand gripping my jacket. I didn't try to pull away. I just stared at his fingers until he slowly let go. "You destroyed the family," I told him. "I'm just the one refusing to pay the bill." I walked down the hallway with Reese and followed Stellan into a small, windowless room. There was a metal table and 3 chairs. Stellan sat down across from us and opened his folder. Inside was a photocopy of the contract, a picture of my brother's forged signature, and a printout of the deed to my orchard. "Your brother is sticking to his story," Stellan said, pulling a pen from his shirt pocket. "He says you knew about the crew. He says you authorized the lien as a short-term security measure, but then got cold feet when you saw the heavy equipment." "He's lying," I said. "I need it on the record," Stellan said, sliding a formal statement form across the table. "If you sign this affidavit stating that you did not authorize this signature, I'm formally charging him with felony forgery and fraud. He won't be going home today. But if you tell me this is just a civil dispute between brothers, I kick it out of my precinct and you handle the lien in civil court." I looked at the piece of paper. It was just a standard form, black ink on cheap white paper. But signing it meant sending my brother to a cell. It meant my parents losing their house. It meant confirming, permanently, that I was no longer part of their ecosystem of bailouts and excuses. "My client will sign the affidavit," Reese said smoothly. I picked up the pen. My hand was completely steady. I signed my actual signature on the bottom line and pushed the paper back across the table. "He forged it," I said. Stellan nodded, closed the folder, and stood up. "I'll go process the charges. He'll have an arraignment hearing on Monday morning. You'll likely be subpoenaed as the primary witness." He left the room. Reese let out a slow breath and leaned back in his chair. "That was the easy part," he said quietly. I looked at him. "What's the hard part?" "Holt's company," Reese replied. "Just because Devin is charged criminally doesn't make the lien magically disappear from the county registry. Holt's legal department isn't going to just walk away from an $80,000 loss because Devin lied to them. They have a signed contract with a notary stamp. They are going to argue that you and Devin colluded to defraud them. That's insane. Why would I collude to put a lien on my own property, to get the timber cut for free, and then claim fraud to avoid paying the mobilization fee?" Reese said, playing devil's advocate. "It happens more often than you think in commercial agriculture. Holt's lawyer is a woman named Sloan Fairfax. She's ruthless. I've gone up against her before. She's going to file a motion to enforce the lien on Monday, which means we have to go to civil court to file an emergency injunction to stop a foreclosure process. I don't have the money for a massive legal fight, Reese, I know," he said. "That's why we need to find the notary, Caspian Thorne. If we can prove the notary was complicit in the forgery, or that Devin actively bypassed him, we can invalidate the contract before Sloan gets a judge to enforce it. But if Thorne swears you were in his office and signed that paper..." Reese let the sentence hang in the air. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from an unknown number. "I know what you just did in that room." I stared at the screen. A second text came through immediately. "Sylvie and I are packing up the boys. We're coming to the farm. You owe us a place to stay now that you've ruined Devin. Do not try to lock us out." I didn't reply. I just handed the phone to Reese. He read the messages, his expression completely blank. He handed the phone back to me. "Do you have a gate at the bottom of your driveway?" he asked. "A rusted cattle gate," I said. "I haven't closed it since I bought the place." "Close it," Reese said. "Put a padlock on it. If she shows up, do not engage. Do not argue with her in front of her kids. Call the county dispatcher and tell them you have a trespasser. Devin's arrest is public record now, and she's panicking. Panic makes people unpredictable." I nodded. I walked out of the sheriff's station and got into my truck. The drive back to the orchard felt longer than usual. The sun was getting low, casting long shadows across the mountains. My phone kept buzzing in my cup holder. I glanced at the screen. It was my mother, calling over and over again. I didn't answer. When I reached the bottom of my driveway, I put the truck in park and got out. The cattle gate was heavy, sagging on its hinges, half buried in tall grass. I had to put my shoulder into the rusted metal to push it across the dirt road. It screeched the whole way. I pulled a heavy master lock from my glove box. I'd bought it months ago for the equipment shed and never used it, and snapped it through the heavy chain wrapped around the wooden fence post. I drove up to the house, went inside, and locked the doors. The house was incredibly quiet, the kind of quiet that usually settled my nerves, but tonight, it just felt empty. I made a sandwich I didn't want and ate it over the sink. I kept looking out the kitchen window, watching the tree line down by the main road. At 7:30 p.m., I saw the headlights. They turned off the county road and swept across the trees, stopping abruptly at the bottom of my driveway. Then a car horn started blaring, long, sustained blasts that echoed up the ridge. I put my plate down. I grabbed a flashlight and walked out onto the porch. I could see Sylvie's dark blue minivan idling at the locked gate. The horn stopped, and I heard a car door slam. "Open the gate." A voice shrieked. It was thin and frantic, carrying easily through the crisp night air. I didn't yell back. I pulled my phone out and dialed the non-emergency number for the county sheriff. I told the dispatcher that a woman was trespassing at my gate, refusing to leave and trying to force entry. The dispatcher told me a deputy was already in the area and would be there in 10 minutes. I walked down the gravel driveway. I didn't rush. I kept the flashlight pointed at the ground, not wanting to blind anyone, but needing to see where I was stepping in the dark. As I got closer, I saw Sylvie rattling the heavy chain against the wooden post. She was wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled into a messy knot. When she heard the crunch of my boots on the gravel, she stopped and gripped the cold metal bars of the gate. "Unlock this right now," she demanded. Her voice was shaking, caught somewhere between fury and tears. "You need to leave, Sylvie," I said, stopping about 10 feet from the gate. "Leave and go where?" she screamed. "The landlord locked us out. Devon's accounts are frozen. The rent check bounced 3 days ago, and they changed the locks this afternoon while we were out. I have 3 teenagers in this car. Where are we supposed to sleep?" I looked past her. Inside the minivan, I could see the faint glow of cell phone screens illuminating the faces of 3 kids in the back seats. They looked miserable. The youngest one, a boy who couldn't have been more than 13, was staring out the window at me. "I'm sorry about your apartment," I said, keeping my voice entirely flat. "But you aren't staying here. This is your brother's fault, and he is sitting in a jail cell because of you," she yelled, her knuckles turning white on the gate. "He was trying to fix everything. He told me he had a way to get the money. He told me the timber sale was a sure thing. He stole the equity in my farm to do it," I said. "He forged my signature. It's just trees." She cried out. "You have 60 acres. You couldn't give up 20 to save his company? To keep a roof over my kids' heads?" "Devon's company failed a year ago, Sylvie. My parents mortgaged their house to keep it afloat, and he blew that money too. Now he's trying to take mine. I'm not the one making your kids homeless. The guy you're dating is." She let go of the gate and grabbed her phone from her pocket. "Your mother said you were like this. She said you were a cold, selfish prick who only cared about his bank account. I'm calling her. She's coming up here." I blocked her number, I said, and I called the police. "They're going to be here in about 2 minutes. Sylvie froze. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. "You called the cops on me? With my children in the car?" "I called the cops on a trespasser." Just then, the sweep of blue and red lights cut through the trees along the county road. A white SUV pulled up behind Sylvie's minivan. A deputy stepped out, adjusting his duty belt. It wasn't Graves or Stellan. It was a younger guy, maybe 25, looking tired and annoyed. He walked up to the gate. "Evening," he said, looking between me and Sylvie. "Got a call about a disturbance. He locked me out." Sylvie told the deputy, pointing at me. "We have nowhere to go, and he won't let his own family onto the property." The deputy looked at me. "Is she on the deed, sir?" "No," I said. "She's my brother's girlfriend. I told her she's not welcome here." The deputy sighed. He turned to Sylvie. "Ma'am, it's private property. If he doesn't want you here, you have to leave. I can give you the address for a family shelter in town, but you can't park in front of this gate." "A shelter?" Sylvie repeated, her voice cracking. "I'm not taking my kids to a shelter. Then you need to call a friend or find a hotel," the deputy said, his tone firming up. "But you need to move the vehicle." Sylvie stared at him, then glared at me with a hatred so pure it felt physical. She didn't say another word. She turned around, marched back to the minivan, and slammed the door. The engine revved aggressively, and she threw it into reverse, backing out onto the county road before throwing it into drive and speeding off. The deputy watched her go, then shone his flashlight on my padlock. "Good call locking it," he said. "Have a quiet night." "Thanks," I said. I walked back up the hill in the dark. The silence returned, but it didn't feel like peace anymore. It felt like a siege. Monday morning came fast. I was sitting at my kitchen table at 8 a.m., drinking black coffee and staring at my laptop screen. I was trying to review some freelance code I had picked up to generate some fast cash, but the lines of syntax were just blurring together. My phone rang. It was Reese. "Sloan Fairfax filed the motion," Reese said the moment I answered. She was waiting at the clerk's office when they unlocked the doors. "She filed an emergency motion to enforce the mechanic's lien based on breach of contract and fraud." I rubbed my eyes. "Fraud by Devon. Fraud by the guarantors, according to her," Reese said. "Her filing argues that because Devon and you are brothers, and because your parents are financially entangled with Devon's failing business, it is highly probable that you colluded to secure the logging crew with the intent of claiming forgery later to dodge the $80,000 mobilization fee." "That's a massive leap of logic. It's a very common grift in commercial real estate," Reese corrected. "And Sloan is very good at her job. She doesn't have to prove you colluded yet. She just has to convince a judge that the lien should remain active while they investigate. If the judge agrees, your title remains clouded, and Holt's company can begin foreclosure proceedings in 30 days to force a settlement." I looked out the window at the endless rows of apple trees. They were mine. I had bought them with 12 years of my life. "What about the notary?" I asked. "Caspian Thorne. Did the police talk to him?" "Stellan brought him in yesterday," Reese said, his voice dropping slightly. Thorne lawyered up immediately. His story is that Devon came into his shipping center on Thursday afternoon with a man who presented a valid Massachusetts driver's license matching your name and face. Thorne claims he stamped the document in good faith, so he's covering his own ass. Exactly, he claims he was duped by a fake ID. And conveniently, the security camera in his lobby resets every 24 hours, so the footage from Thursday is gone. So it's my word against a notary's stamp. "Unless we find the guy Devon hired to play you," Reese said. "Devon's arraignment is at 11 this morning. Stellan is going to press him hard on the accomplice. If Devon gives up the fake ID guy, Thorne's stamp gets invalidated, the contract dies, and the lien drops. Will Devon talk?" "Devon is terrified," Reese said. "He spent the weekend in county holding, but he's also relying on a public defender right now because his assets are frozen. If your parents manage to hire him a private criminal defense attorney, they'll tell him to shut his mouth and not admit to a secondary felony of hiring an imposter." "I'll be at the courthouse at 10:30, I said. I hung up, put on a clean shirt, and drove into town. The county courthouse was an old granite building with terrible parking. I had to walk 3 blocks from a municipal lot. When I walked through the metal detectors and found the courtroom for arraignments, I saw my parents immediately. They were sitting on a wooden bench in the hallway. My dad looked like he had aged 10 years in 3 days. He was wearing a suit that looked slightly too big for him now, his posture slumped. My mom was sitting next to him, staring blankly at the floor, clutching a leather purse in her lap. They looked up when my boots clicked against the marble floor. My dad stood up. He didn't look angry anymore. He just looked hollowed out. "We couldn't get a loan," he said. It wasn't a greeting, it was just a raw admission of defeat. Sullivan at the credit union, he ran the numbers. With the business loan cross collateralized against the house, our debt-to-income ratio is too high. No one will give us $80,000 to pay off the logging company. I stopped a few feet away from him. I'm sorry, I said. And I was. Not for Devin, but for the fact that my parents had tethered their entire existence to a sinking ship. If Devin goes to prison, the bank is going to call in the loan on the house, my dad said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper so the passing bailiffs wouldn't hear. They sent an automated notice this morning. The arrest triggered a default review on his business accounts. Dad, I can't fix that for you. I don't have $80,000 either. You have the land, my mom whispered, finally looking up at me. Her eyes were completely dry, but they were desperate. You can just let the lawyer enforce the lien. Let them foreclose on the 20 acres. You'd still have 40 acres left, honey. You'd still have the house. I stared at her. The sheer mathematical gymnastics she was willing to perform to excuse Devin's theft was staggering. You want me to surrender a third of my property to a commercial logging company to pay a debt that Devin incurred by forging my name, I said, spelling it out slowly. It saves him, my mom pleaded. If the debt is satisfied, the logging company might drop the civil suit. It shows the judge he's trying to make restitution. It's a felony forgery, Mom. The state is pressing charges, not the logging company. Me paying his debt doesn't unforge the document. It shows good faith, my dad argued, stepping forward. Sloan Fairfax told our lawyer that if the 80 grand is paid, Holt's company won't cooperate as witnesses for the prosecution. The state's case falls apart without the victims. I felt my jaw tighten. You talked to Sloan Fairfax? My dad hesitated, realizing he had just stepped on a landmine. Our lawyer reached out to her. We were trying to find a settlement. You colluded with the plaintiff's attorney behind my back to try and force a foreclosure on my land? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. We are trying to save our home. My dad shot back, his voice rising in the echoing hallway. We are trying to save your brother's life. You're trying to drown me so he can use me as a raft, I said. Before he could respond, the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung open. Reese walked out holding a yellow legal pad. He took one look at my parents, then looked at me. They're calling his case, Reese said. You don't have to go in if you don't want to. I'm going in, I said. I walked past my parents and entered the courtroom. It smelled of floor wax and old wood. I took a seat in the back row. My parents came in a moment later and sat 2 rows ahead of me, closer to the defense table. A door beside the judge's bench opened, and a bailiff led Devin out. He was wearing an Orange County jumpsuit. His wrists were cuffed in front of him. He looked completely disheveled, his hair greasy, his face pale and terrified. He scanned the gallery, found my parents, and looked at them with wide, pleading eyes. Then his gaze shifted to the back row, and he saw me. He swallowed hard and looked away. The judge, an older woman with sharp glasses, read the charges: felony forgery, criminal fraud, and attempted grand larceny. The public defender stood up. He looked overworked and exhausted. Your Honor, we enter a plea of not guilty to all charges. The prosecutor, an Ada I didn't recognize, immediately stood up. Your Honor, the state requests bail be set at $100,000. The defendant has significant financial liabilities, including a $150,000 ears lien, and has demonstrated a willingness to commit major fraud to secure capital. He is a flight risk. The public defender argued for release on recognizance, citing Devin's lack of prior criminal history, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. The judge looked over the paperwork. Given the financial scope of the alleged fraud and the outstanding federal tax liens, I agree with the state. Bail is set at $100,000, cash or surety. My mom let out a muffled gasp. My dad put his arm around her, staring at the judge in shock. They couldn't afford a bail bondsman's 10% fee. They couldn't afford anything. The bailiff grabbed Devin's arm to lead him back to holding. Devin panicked. He planted his feet, turning back toward the gallery. Dad, Devin yelled, his voice cracking. Dad, don't let them leave me here. Call the investors. Call Sylvie. We'll get you out. My dad yelled back, standing up. Just hold on. Silence in the court. The judge banged her gavel, pointing at my dad. Sit down, sir, or I'll have you removed. Devin was dragged through the side door. It slammed shut behind him. My parents sat perfectly still for a long time. Then, slowly, my dad stood up. He didn't look back at me. He just took my mom's hand and led her out of the courtroom. Reese sat down on the bench next to me. He didn't give up the fake ID guy, Reese noted quietly. His public defender probably told him not to talk to the police at all, I said, watching the empty door where my brother had just vanished. Which means Sloan Fairfax is going to proceed with a civil enforcement motion, Reese said. We have a hearing on Thursday to determine if the lien stays on your title while the criminal case plays out. If the judge leaves it in place, you are legally barred from selling any part of the farm, and Holt's company can begin draining your finances in legal fees to force a settlement. We need to find out who walked into that notary's office, I said. Reese sighed. I can hire a private investigator, but that costs money, and right now we are entirely on the defensive. I stood up. I know someone who might know who Devin hired. Rice looked up at me. Who? Sylvie, I said. I walked out of the courthouse. The midday sun was blinding. I pulled out my phone, went into my blocked contacts, unblocked Sylvie's number, and dialed. She answered on the first ring. What do you want? She snapped. Her voice sounded exhausted, thin, and ragged. I want to know where you slept last night, I said. We slept in the minivan at a Walmart parking lot, she spat. Are you happy now? Are you satisfied? I'm at the courthouse, I said. They just set Devin's bail at $100 grand. My parents can't pay it. He's staying in county lockup until the trial. There was dead silence on the line. I could hear the faint sound of traffic in the background on her end. He told me it was a misunderstanding, she whispered. He said your dad was going to fix it this morning. My dad is bankrupt, I told her, keeping my voice level. Devin ruined them too. Listen to me very carefully, Sylvie. Devin went to a notary named Caspian Thorne on Thursday afternoon to forge a document. He brought a guy with him who had a fake ID with my name on it. If I don't find out who that guy is, a logging company is going to foreclose on my farm. Why would I help you? She asked, her voice trembling with sudden anger. You locked us out in the dark, because if you help me prove Devin committed fraud, I will wire wire you $2,000 today, I said. You can get a hotel for a week, feed your kids, and figure out your next move. I know you're broke. I know Devin left you holding the bag for that apartment. The line was quiet for a long time. I could hear her breathing. He met someone on Wednesday night, Sylvie finally said, her voice dropping to a cautious murmur. He said it was a guy he used to know from his crypto startup days, a guy who knew how to handle compliance issues. They met at a bar in South Boston before we drove up to Vermont. Do you have a name? No, she said. But he used his laptop in the car on the drive up. He was messaging him on Telegram. The laptop is still in the minivan. I stopped walking. Where are you right now? The Walmart off Route 7, she said. If you want this laptop, you bring the cash in an envelope. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I told her, and hung up the phone. I didn't have $2,000 in cash on me, but I had enough left in my checking account to cover it. I drove to the local bank branch in town, walked up to the teller, and withdrew the money. They put it in a crisp white envelope. It felt incredibly light for what it was buying me. The Walmart parking lot was mostly empty. It was mid-afternoon on a Monday. I spotted the blue minivan parked near the back of the lot, away from the store entrance, idling next to a cart return. As I pulled up next to it, the passenger side window rolled down. Sylvie looked worse in the daylight. The frantic anger from the night before was completely gone, replaced by a dull, hollow exhaustion. I didn't see her kids. They were probably in the back, trying to sleep or ignoring the reality of their situation. I put my truck in park, kept the engine running, and handed the white envelope through my window. She took it without counting it. She didn't say thank you. She reached down into the passenger footwell and hoisted a silver MacBook up, passing it through the window to me. The aluminum casing was scratched, and there was a faded sticker from Devin's failed crypto startup on the lid. I'm going to take the boys to my sister's place in Ohio, Sylvie said quietly, staring straight ahead at the asphalt. Tell your brother not to call me when he gets out. She rolled her window up, put the minivan in gear, and drove away. I didn't go back to the farm. I drove straight to Reese's office, a small converted storefront next to a bakery on Main Street. He was sitting at his desk, drafting a motion, when I walked in and set the MacBook down on top of his legal pads. Sylvie sold him out, I said. Reese looked at the laptop, then at me. He opened the lid. The screen flickered to life. There was a password prompt. I felt a sudden spike of anxiety, but then I remembered who we were dealing with. Devin was a guy who thought he was the smartest person in every room, which meant he was lazy with the details. Try his birthday, I said, or our parents' anniversary. Reese typed in Devin's birth year and the word crypto. It didn't work. I leaned over and typed our mother's maiden name followed by a 1. The screen unlocked immediately. He didn't even have Telegram hidden. The app was pinned right to the dock at the bottom of the screen. Reese clicked it. It opened automatically, already logged into Devin's account. Devin hadn't bothered to set up two-factor authentication or a privacy lock. He probably assumed he would never get caught. Reese scrolled through the chat history. It didn't take long to find it. The contact name was just .n. There were dozens of messages from the previous Wednesday night. Devin was panicking. He wrote that the logging company needed the guarantee by Friday, or they were pulling out. SN responded with a price, $500 for a rush job on a Massachusetts driver's license with a supplied photo and name. Then came the message that buried him. Devin had sent a clear, front-facing photo of a guy he knew from Boston, followed by a text that read, "Put this face on it. The name is my brother's. I have the deed paperwork ready. We just need to walk into the notary tomorrow and get the stamp." SN had replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Reese leaned back in his chair and let out a long, slow breath. He documented his own felony on an unencrypted desktop app. "Can we use this?" I asked. "Is it admissible?" "We don't need to worry about admissibility right now," Reese said, pulling his phone from his pocket. "We just need Detective Stellan to see it. This gives the police the probable cause they need to subpoena the IP address and cell data for SN, and it proves premeditated fraud. Once the state has this, Sloan Fairfax has absolutely no ground to stand on in civil court." We drove the laptop back to the county station together. Stellan took it into an evidence room, had a tech image the hard drive, and read the messages himself. He didn't say much, just nodded, asked me to sign a chain of custody form, and told me he would be updating the charges against my brother before the end of the day. The next 3 days were a waiting game. I stayed on the orchard. I didn't leave the property. I kept the gate locked. I pruned the apple trees in the lower acreage, my hands working automatically while my mind tried to process the sheer gravity of what was happening to my family. On Thursday morning, I put on a suit I hadn't worn in 3 years and met Reese at the county courthouse. We walked into the civil courtroom at 9 o'clock. Sloan Fairfax was already there. She was wearing a sharp navy blazer, looking entirely confident as she organized her files on the plaintiff's table. She barely looked at us when we sat down. The judge took the bench. He called the case. Sloan stood up to present her emergency motion to enforce the mechanic's lien. She didn't even get 3 sentences in before Reese stood up and handed a certified document to the bailiff, asking him to pass it to the judge. "Your Honor," Reese said smoothly, "we ask that this motion be dismissed with prejudice." Yesterday afternoon, the county district attorney formally indicted the defendant's brother Devin, along with a co-conspirator named Soren Novak, for felony forgery and identity theft. I have provided the court with the sworn police affidavit detailing the digital confession and the recovery of the fraudulent identification used to secure the notary stamp on the plaintiff's contract. Sloan Fairfax stopped talking. She looked at the paper the judge was reading, her expression hardening. The judge reviewed the affidavit for a long minute in total silence. Then, he looked over his glasses at Sloan. "Counselor," the judge said, his voice dry, "it appears your client's contract was executed with a stolen identity, and the state has the evidence to prove it. You have no legal standing to enforce a lien against this property. Your Honor, my client is still out $80,000 in mobilization fees due to the fraud perpetrated on their company," Sloan argued, though the fire had gone out of her voice. She knew she had lost. "Then I suggest you file a civil suit against the brother sitting in county lockup," the judge replied. "The lien is stricken from the title. This property is clear. Motion denied. We are adjourned." He banged his gavel. It was over in less than 10 minutes. Sloan packed up her briefcase, shot Reese Reese a look of professional irritation and walked out without a word. Reese turned to me, a small, genuine smile on his face. "Your title is clean," he said. "The farm is yours." I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright Thursday morning air. I felt a strange sense of weightlessness, the constant, crushing pressure of my family's demands, the financial panic, the fear of losing the one thing I had built for myself. It was just gone. It evaporated into the Vermont sky. When I got back to my truck, I checked my phone. There was a single voicemail from my dad. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the screen for a long time. Finally, I hit play. The audio was staticky. I could hear the sound of packing tape ripping in the background. "The bank called the loan," my dad's voice said. He sounded old. He didn't sound angry or commanding or disappointed. He just sounded broken. "They gave us 30 days to vacate. We're putting everything into storage and moving into a rental apartment out by the highway. Devon's public defender says he's going to have to take a plea deal. They're talking about 2 to 3 years in a state facility." He paused. I heard him take a shaky breath. "You won," my dad said. "I hope your trees are worth it." The line went dead. I didn't delete the voicemail, but I didn't save it either. I just put the phone in the center console, put the truck in drive, and headed home. By the time I reached the bottom of my dirt road, the afternoon sun was catching the leaves of the oak trees, turning the ridge into a wall of gold and green. I got out, unlocked the rusted cattle gate, and pushed it open. I didn't bother locking it behind me. I didn't need to anymore. No one was coming for me. I parked by the farmhouse, changed into my work boots, and walked out into the rows of Roxbury russets. The air smelled of damp earth and growing things. I reached out and rested my hand against the rough bark of the nearest trunk. It was solid, it was real, and it was mine. I grabbed my pruning shears from the porch, walked down the row, and got to work.